Hi, everybody. Hello, Jane.
Hi, Wen. Hi, everyone.
Welcome to this little Haymarket joint we got going here this afternoon. And I'm Wen Stephenson. I'm the author of Learning to Live in the Dark, Essays in a Time of Catastrophe, which just came out in June from Haymarket. And let me just take a second here to thank everyone at Haymarket Books, and especially my editor, John McDonald, who is here with us somewhere behind the scenes, and also Rory Fanning, who has done just everything possible to get this book out into the world. It may not be the easiest book to market, I don't know, but and just everyone else at Haymarket. Who made this book a tangible thing that I can hold in my hand, and you can too, for the low price of yeah. But seriously, Haymarket Books. I mean, in this time, this moment that we're in, these folks and so many others, of course, in our country. Helping to keep the radical flame alive at a moment when it is under serious threat. So I am also a correspondent for The Nation magazine. Have been writing for them for, gosh, about a dozen years now, and I'm a fairly frequent contributor to a great little magazine called The Baffler, that you may know. And I'm a veteran journalist, essayist, and climate justice activist. And in a previous life, I was a PhD student in English, at the University of Chicago. But I left all of that for the sake of my health, and I've been an editor over the years for places like the Atlantic and the Boston Globe. But in 2010, I had a reckoning, and I left my career in mainstream media, and I've since covered and engaged in and helped organize nonviolent resistance to fossil capital. And That is what I do. I write about it. I've been deeply involved in the climate justice movement, including the more kind of radical edges of that movement, now for about 15 years. So, and here we are. So, and I'm coming to you today from near Boston, where the Red Sox are holding on to some hope of a postseason. So, um, my wonderful interlocutor here for this is the great Jane Hirshfield, and Jane is honestly, truly among American poetry's foremost voices for the biosphere. She likes to say, not just the climate, and as the New York Times Magazine put it, is writing some of the most important poetry in the world today. She's the author of 10 collections of poetry. I believe that's right, 10, yes, and even 10. Most recently, The Asking, New and Selected Poems. She's also published 2 collections of essays and edited the amazing anthology, actually, I have it right here, called Women in Praise of the Sacred, 43 Centuries of Spiritual Poetry by Women. 43 centuries, that's not bad. That's pretty good. Um, so Jane has won many awards, prestigious awards, but in addition to that, in 2017, she founded Poets for Science, which is a great organization that is at the bleeding edge of what's possible in bringing science and activism and the arts and poetry together. So I want to say, by way of starting here, I'm going to kind of introduce things, and also kind of give a very short reading from the opening pages of my book in a moment here. But I want to start by saying just how good it is always to be in the same space, if that's what this is, virtual, space or otherwise, with Jane. We've known each other a while, not so much in terms of in-person interaction, but we've corresponded now for like 30 years, since I was an editor at a national magazine that will go unmentioned, and Jane was knocking everybody out with some of her earlier poetry, but we've been having this conversation, the one that we're embarking on here right now, in some form or another for wow, like I guess 3 years now we've been going at this, and mostly in correspondence, mostly in email, but occasionally in live, interaction like this, and sometimes even in person when we're so lucky. Jane, you've always have such a great calming effect on me. Okay, I mean, seriously, you have this way of bringing calmness and clarity and maybe most important, warmth and compassion to any conversation. And I mean, you're like my personal bodhisattva, okay? and this, warmth and compassion and calmness and clarity. I mean, these are things undoubtedly that the world needs right now, that we all need, especially right now. We need these calmness, especially clarity, compassion, in order to think and act effectively, beneficially in what is a truly dark and frightening time. And so for me, anyway, those three C's, the calmness, clarity, and compassion, these are perhaps the three most important attributes of Buddhist practice, as I understand it. We could put other labels on them, other names for them, and no doubt other spiritual traditions too. But as it happens, Jane and I are both longtime Zen Buddhist practitioners. Although I'm also what you might call an aspiring Christian. I was raised deeply conservative, but for many years now, I've been trying to practice in the progressive social justice tradition of Christianity, the tradition of Martin Luther King Jr. and Cesar Chavez and Dorothy Day and the Berrigan brothers and Cornel West and Tracy Blackman and William Barber and Liz Theo Harris and liberation theology of all kinds. But back to Buddhism. Jane, of course, you have far more experience in Zen practice than I do. I've only been a serious Zen student for about 2 decades, and I've been a member of a local Sangha for about 15 years now. But Jane has been practicing for what, 5 decades?
Yeah.
Yes, since your early 20s, right? And and you actually spent several years in monastic training in your 20s at the Tassajara Monastery on the California coast. And folks, let me tell you, that is the real deal. That is the real deal. And you have a long-time affiliation with the San Francisco Zen Center, which was founded by the great Japanese Soto Zen master Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. And then my teacher here on the East Coast was a personal student of the great Korean Zen master Sungsan Sunim, who founded the Providence and Cambridge Zen Centers and many others around the world. So, yes, calmness. So, you see, some of you with us right now may know I'm actually not a very calm person. That's why I need Zen practice, right? I've dealt with clinical levels of anxiety for most of my life. And to be totally honest, for many years, I tried to self-medicate with alcohol, and until I had to face the fact that I was in fact addicted and that I'm an alcoholic and that I was spiraling downward. This was in my late 30s. And so I entered therapy and I quit drinking. And I've been sober now for, I figured this out today, 19 years, 4 months, and 4 weeks as of today. So, and, but it was when I quit drinking that I started practicing traditional Zen meditation in a serious way. And I rediscovered Buddhism, which I'd first encountered at the source in Asia in my early 20s, my own early 20s. That was in the 90s. And I wouldn't be here right now. I mean, I think I can honestly say I would not be here right now doing what I'm doing in my life, writing, journalism, activism, if it weren't for the profound healing help that I received from others. You know, my family, my wife, God bless her, my therapist, my clergy, my Buddhist and Christian faith communities. I just honestly believe I wouldn't be here doing this right now. And someone else who helped in all of that was Jane Hirshfield and her poems. It really, throughout my adult life, have helped get me through. So, so let me pause there and breathe and just say that I hope I'm not making anyone uncomfortable by getting this personal with you, okay? I promise most of this conversation, the rest of this conversation is not gonna be about me, all right? But, and because you know, I know this may not be what you expected when you RSVP'd for this event, right? This is not so far the usual book talk. But see, here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing. All of this, everything we're facing today, how we deal with it, how we respond to it, is deeply personal. And so I don't want to sit here and put on an act for you, all right? I don't want to sit here as the author, the wise one handing down answers. Okay, I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. I want to be real with you. Okay? Because that's what I've tried to do in this book. In fact, it's the whole point. So I want to do something, you know, kind of radical and just speak to you from the heart and from that incomprehensible nexus of heart and mind and body that is what makes us human. You know, like sometimes when I hear people say, not to make things personal, well, you know, what I'm really hearing is, don't be so human. You know. So Jane, how am I doing here?
Whoa.
Anything? Is there anything you want to add at this point? You know, like we're obviously going to get into some specific questions about the themes in my book and about your work, obviously. But first, is there anything you want to say about yourself and like where you're coming from, you know, before we move on?
Well, I certainly don't want to say anything more about me, but I do want to say that I'm going to add another C because of what you have just done in terms of uh, your self-revelation and your truth-saying of this actual moment. And I'm going to add to your 3 C words another. I'm going to add the word courage. And courage, as anybody who knows the etymology side, is a word that comes straight from the French word for heart. So courage. When we encourage one another, we are speaking heart to heart. And that strand of what you are giving us, I think, is a really unusual but very important place to maybe begin this conversation, which is so much, of the book is about engagement, activism, and how we find a way to continue when it is desperately hard to continue. That is so much the central question that I feel running through the book is how do we continue in despair, bewilderment, fear of failure, and this strand of the simple courage to speak honestly, to care and not succumb to apathy, That is in you, it is in what you have just said, and it is certainly in the book, in essay after essay, direction after direction in which you look. So.
Thank you, Jane. Can you hear me, by the way? I think I might have cut out there for a moment. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I can't speak to everybody else, but I can hear you.
Okay. I know somebody from Haymarket will let us know if there's a problem. So
right.
Okay. Well, thank you for all of that. And we're just a little mutual appreciation society here, I guess. But so to segue into the main topic of this, well, all of this is the main topic, but to segue into our as advertised conversation for tonight, tonight, whatever it is, it's afternoon where you are, and our framing, this framing of faith, humanism, and radical solidarity in a time of catastrophe. I just want to offer a little bit. This is now we get into the typical book author talk here. I want to offer a little bit from the opening pages of my book, Learning to Live in the Dark, and which explain a little bit about where I'm coming from, a little more about where I'm coming from specifically, and why I wrote it. So written over a period of 8 years, beginning in 2016, and intended to be read as a series. These essays concern themselves with a not-so-distant past, an embattled present, and a future that, while impossible to know in its particulars, is nevertheless increasingly circumscribed by catastrophic ecological breakdown and social instability. The geophysical forces unleashed by the carbon-fueled warming of Earth's atmosphere, combined with the political forces of denialist capital and various racial and ethno-religious nationalisms, already create a situation in which forms of political and social evil, on a scale not seen perhaps since the middle of the 20th century, have come now into view. The necessity of naming these evils is among the convictions animating this book. How to live into this time while holding on to those aspects of our humanity that can salvage and sustain any sort of just community is the book's central question. So in what follows, I look back in the pages of this book, I'll just interject, I look back to 20th century thinkers like Hannah Arendt and Simone Weil and Albert Camus and the great Frantz Fanon, and back to some 19th century thinkers and some of our contemporaries writing about and engaging in the struggles of our own moment, and not only the climate struggle. And if these writers and thinkers have any one thing in common, aside from like fierce intelligence and a willingness to face the most harrowing facts of our times, of their times and our time, it's the aspiration toward something like a universal humanism, whether secular or religious, and ultimately transcending both, I think. And all are in search of what I'd call, without embarrassment, human solidarity and its sources. Now, this book was written before the outcome of the last US election could be known, of course. But make no mistake, even the best imaginable result would not have, quote unquote, saved us. There is no American center-left solution to our global climate and political emergency. And a second Trump presidency only points to what we already knew, that the United States faces the very real threat and now reality of white nationalist, so-called Christian fascism. The latter has been clear to those with ears to hear and eyes to see for the past 8 years, if not the past century. And it's among the underlying currents running through the essays in this book. And so given these combined and converging realities, this book keeps returning to a question that now seems to resonate with all the more urgency, especially for those of us on the left and the radical left. If nothing short of revolution in some form can salvage the possibility of a better world, ecologically and socially, and yet, if a viable revolutionary mass movement is seemingly nowhere to be found, then what does a life of radical commitment and solidarity look like in the face of catastrophes that will not, do not wait? Will those born after us, if they emerge from the flood, ask why we did not fight more forcefully? So, as you know, some of these essays are rather personal, and I also say here in the opening pages that this book is written not merely by a journalist or essayist or activist, or by a white, straight, cisgender man born and raised in Southern California with a working class, rural Texas, evangelical Christian family background. I am indeed all of these, and I fully acknowledge the privileged yet complex position from which I write, not least in that, like most readers of this book and most of us here, I am also an educated, housed, well-fed, global northerner and beneficiary of empire. But these terms and labels say nothing about the inner life of the one writing and speaking, about the psychological, emotional, spiritual, even physical toll of wrestling for many years with the questions raised here and with the responsibilities and choices required of one who takes them seriously. So maybe I'm not supposed to admit this, especially as a person of privilege, because after all, what are my struggles compared to those of the Earth's oppressed? But in early 2016, after the publication of my first book, my book about the US climate movement, and as the world watched the rise of Donald Trump and the surge of white, quote unquote, Christian nationalism, I fell into a vertiginous depression, not for the first or last time, intensified by my long struggle with anxiety and addiction. I didn't know if I would write or engage in activism ever again. This was in 2016. And I confess, and this is not easy, that I questioned my reasons and my desire to live. I was plagued with intrusive, and have been in years since, with intrusive suicidal ideation. And it was in those darkest moments that I picked up Arendt and Camus, and Weil, and Fanon, and many others who are not in this book, who faced the abyss in their time. And I began to read them, or reread them in earnest. And that's how this book was born, as though I was trying to read and write my way out of real despair. I won't bullshit you. I don't know if I've succeeded in reading and writing my way out of despair. But I do know that I've chosen to live and to fight and to go down fighting. So if these essays as my own sort of confession or my appeal to posterity reveal a constant internal struggle between despair in the face of our predicament and something like not any, cheap hope, but what might be called resolve. And if the struggle has no satisfying end, so that despair and resolve live side by side, unreconciled, then the book I've written is an honest one. Where precisely the resolve comes from, how to find it, how to hold on to it, and why, may be unknowable. All that matters is that the resolve is real, every bit as real as the dark itself. So Jane, I mean, you've read that actually a long time ago, um, and I'm just wondering how that lands with you now in this moment that we're in, and yeah, and just how you understand that these terms that we've chosen to frame our conversation around, faith, humanism, radical solidarity, all of which, are kind of addressed there in those opening pages, and they're big ones. So maybe just take the first one to begin with. I don't know, wherever you want to begin.
Okay. Um, you know, the struggle you describe, I think, one reason why it was perhaps inevitable that we would become friends, except you kind of made sure it happened by reaching out at the very beginning of our getting to know each other, not as, an editor working with a writer on a format, but as human beings. I had the exact same reaction that you did in 2016. And I immediately did, in a different field, exactly what you did, which was I began reading only books written by or about people who lived in catastrophic times.
Hmm.
And I never stopped, from that election night until now. That has been what I have done because I was so hungry for the company, the examples, the portals that are opened into different possibilities. And then your book just steps right into, exactly what I have been wanting to read for over 8 years now. So the three words, I will jump right in and give people a little of the background of our
Okay.
conversation about it, which is solidarity, a word I have always loved, and especially because I keep the association of the first time I heard it myself used in this particular way, which was Poland. During the Velvet Revolution's beginning, when the solidarity movement in Poland began. An exemplary and heartening, rare example of large change coming to a country without bloodshed because people came together. I'm going to throw in, this is an aside, but a relevant aside because people listening might not know it. Wen has a piece that just came out in today's issue of The Nation. It's available to be looked at online about is this a revolution which is happening right now in Nepal? And I would like to recommend to you all, it is well worth reading for a tiny bit more depth than what we get with our usual news sources. A direct interview with somebody, Wen was just in Nepal rather recently. So, how does change happen? It happens in part by solidarity. The idea of humanism, secular or non-secular, I think it is what we are. It is who we are. We participate in broader existence as human beings. And what humanism means, in part, one aspect of it is what Hannah Arendt talks about and Wen talks about, and the Portuguese poet Pessoa has talked about, and something that I think I'll read you. It is the belief in people rather than generalities. As Arendt says in her, time of earlier language, to speak of men rather than man. My great hero, the Polish poet Czesław Miłosz, also spoke with profound precision about the importance of not generalizing human lives and human beings. I'm going to read you this little tiny 4-line poem by the Portuguese poet Pessoa because I love it and I can. Translated by Richard Zenith. They spoke to me of people and of humanity, but I've never seen people or humanity. I've seen various people, astonishingly dissimilar, each separated from the other by an unpeopled space. And I think that is humanism, to not lose the lineaments of specific and particular lives, and that they count, that they matter, that all of reality takes place only in particulars. Now, faith is the word that Wen and I have batted back and forth some. And I brought up one translation that I know of a Buddhist Dharma teaching, which is, as I learned it, all Buddhism rests on a tripod: great effort, great doubt, and great faith. Now, would you like to interject the translation that you have in mind of this?
Sure. It all comes from the same source, same tradition. Yeah. The way I've seen it translated in the Korean tradition into English that I know is great faith, great courage, great question.
Yeah.
So the effort there, the difference is being effort on the one hand and courage on the other, and doubt on the one hand and question on the other, but they both have faith.
Right.
So what does people who know anything about Buddhism probably know that Buddhism is a non-theistic religion, right? It is a religion. It is a faith tradition, for sure. But and especially as Zen Buddhists, Zen has this reputation, I think deservedly, for being somewhat iconoclastic and non-doctrinal. Tries to be. It's supposed to be. So what in the world is faith? Right? If for a religion that doesn't have God, right?
Right.
How do you answer that?
And for a religion that balances faith with questioning and doubt and says they are equal. This is a tripod. Nothing is on the top of a pyramid here. And I think that is very important to my own understanding of practice and my own understanding of activism, which is this combination of, you bring the whole life to the table, whether one calls that courage or calls it effort. That's what I understand as that leg of the tripod. The doubt and the questioning is a little bit of humility before reality. Whatever is in our minds, it could be wrong. Suzuki Roshi, the Zen master of my own lineage of Soto Zen, he would say to many, many things, is that so? Or maybe so, and that lack of adamance, that lack of, let's just make sure we keep looking with a question in our mind about, are we seeing correctly? Are we seeing selfishly? Are we seeing everything possible? Are we seeing only from one point of view? That is also very important to both activism, I think, if it is to be done with ethics and compassion, and also to Zen practice. And the faith part troubled me because I was one of those people who came to Zen very much as a secular human being. There is a Zen teaching story. Forgive us, all of you who have none of this in background and wasn't expecting this to be part of the conversation. There is a story of the great teacher Bodhidharma being summoned to the emperor of China, and the emperor has been building Buddhist temples and is very proud of himself and thinks he's going to get, through the merit of his activities, he's going to get to Buddhist paradise. And he asks Bodhidharma, what do you think about all that? And Bodhidharma, who came to the capital with great reluctance, didn't want to be there, had no interest in talking to the emperor at all, but really couldn't quite turn it down. He just looks at him and says, "Vast emptiness, nothing holy," and leaves. So, that's the Zen I was drawn to. But the faith is about, I think, this question, which runs through learning to live in the dark, of what allows you to continue? What allows you to resist apathy, despair, fear? Something in us actually must believe, even when we don't feel it, even in the moments of absolute abyss. What saves you is finding what could be called faith, that it matters that we keep paying our debt to existence, that we keep voting for the happiness and flourishing of all beings, that we keep trying, yes, to question our understanding, because who knows whether, one way is right or the other way is right, especially when one speaks of strategies, but to believe that action rather than blinding oneself makes a difference. And that is my association to the word faith.
I could buy that. I could buy that. One thing I just wanted to occur to me as you were speaking there is, for a lot of faith and non-faith traditions, secular philosophies, but and very much including Buddhism, and for example, Buddhism, Zen, maybe in particular, has this, and this I don't think would be deservedly, at least not all the time, has this kind of popular reputation, this image, this reputation for being kind of withdrawn from the world. Never mind that there's a whole now, especially modern tradition of what's called engaged Buddhism, right? Which I think you and I share a lot of the same heroes, who
Yes.
come out of that, would be engaged Buddhists. But there's this reputation of, kind of quietism, withdrawal, finding my inner peace, my Zen, right? And everything will be fine. And if it's not all fine, as long as I'm fine, I can live with the world. I can live in this world, and I don't think that's what it's really about. And I would also add that the other faith traditions that I'm really familiar with, especially Christianity, also have a very strong, very strong, vein of this, coursing through this. And although I'll say that this is a place where positionality and privilege really come into play. Which of the Christian communities, Christian faith traditions in this country have been the most engaged and toward justice and resistance, right? Not the upper middle class white, kind of white bread Christian Protestant traditions. It's the Black church tradition. It's a large part of the Catholic tradition, working class Catholic tradition, and so how do we avoid that? How is it that we avoid that reputation, right, of self-absorption, and what makes faith, and a faith in humanity, or a faith in whatever it may be, radical, and something that inspires and sustains, right, a radical commitment to actually changing the world.
So I am going to first second your part of your opening comment, which is this is just a misunderstanding. It is no more true that a Buddhist monk in the mountains or a Catholic father in the desert. They are not disengaged from the world. They are picking up a particular part of being a human being and practicing it intensely, whether for a few years or for a lifetime. But it is impossible to be disengaged. And the Buddhist teaching of interconnection, Indra's net, that every part of existence is a jewel on a vast net, which is utterly connected, every part to every part. But also more centrally, Zen. And I want to apologize. The Bodhidharma, vast emptiness. We could have a whole other conversation about emptiness, which is a translation that came in early and probably would have been better if English had decided to call it spaciousness rather than emptiness. But
yes,
Zen is part of the Mahayana tradition. And in the Mahayana tradition, there is the idea of the Bodhisattva vow. So engaged Buddhism is not a recent invention. The Bodhisattva vow says extremely simply and directly that a person who practices with full awareness will not abandon the world to seek their own enlightenment and forget about the suffering of others. The way it is often described is the Bodhisattva is the person who, yes, their understanding is now full. They could run off and be a Buddha, whatever that means in this way of describing it, but they are going to stay in the world of suffering, in the cycle of life and death with other human beings and creatures in solidarity until every last blade of grass is saved. That, if that is not engaged Buddhism, I don't know what is. It is about not walling your own experience into some circle separate from the experience of others. And suffering is endless. And the Bodhisattva says, I'm going to stay in there and keep trying to. If I can't get rid of it, I will try to make it less. So
yeah.
that is,
would you do me a favor and read one of your poems for me?
I would.
I think you maybe know which one I want you to read.
I do.
Would you read the poem that's one of your relatively recent poems? It's in the new poems section of The Asking, which just came out 2 years ago. There it is. It's the one called...
Handsome book. They did a good job.
It's the one called I Open the Window. And if anyone actually has read my book to the end, or if anyone reads The Nation magazine, they might recall that I referenced this and quote from this poem of yours in the profile I wrote for The Nation. So yeah.
I open the window. What I wanted wasn't to let in the wetness. That can be mopped. Nor the cold. There are blankets. What I wanted was the siren, the thunder, the neighbor, the fireworks, the dog's bark. Which of them didn't matter? Yes, this world is perfect, all things as they are. But I wanted not to be the one sleeping soundly on a soft pillow, clean sheets untroubled, dreaming there still might be time, while this everywhere crying.
This everywhere crying.
Yeah.
Now, there is a little bit of Buddhism in that poem, I think.
Quite a lot.
Yeah. Although it wears it very lightly, because you certainly don't need to be aware of the Buddhism in the poem in order to appreciate it. But the line that might have struck our audience at maybe in somewhat puzzling way is, you know where I'm going with this. Yes, this world is perfect, all things as they are. Yes. What? This is an event hosted by Haymarket Books, okay? no, this world is not perfect, all things as they are. What the hell does that mean?
So every mystical tradition, not only Buddhism,
Right.
or every mystical tradition throughout the world speaks of the perfection of things as they are. The Catholic mystics, God is everywhere, everything is light. This is an available way to experience any moment of any life if your experience and your life happen to bring you to that moment. And it is sustaining, it is overwhelming, and it vanishes out from under you. So you get these little glimpses of the perfection of things as they are. There is a fascicle, I believe, in the 13th century Zen master Dogen, titled "All the World is One Bright Pearl."
Oh, sure.
All the world is one bright pearl. That perception actually does matter, even within activism, because we must remember, what are we being activist for, if not for the possibilities of beauty, of happiness, of not being hungry and homeless, of joy, of radiance. You cannot throw away the existence of these things and only see the suffering. So, yeah, you can stumble into, for a moment, in a dream, when you're falling in love, you're flooded with, the neurochemistry of happiness as you fall in love, and the world is perfect for those moments, and it really is. It really is. But the next word in the poem is but.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So that closing, almost closing stand, the rest of the poem.
Yeah.
I wanted
Don't be
not
complacent.
to be. Yes, I
Yeah.
wanted not to be the one sleeping soundly on a soft pillow, clean sheets, untroubled, dreaming there still might be time, while this everywhere crying. Now, what's the is that a shout out to the Bodhisattva?
Yeah, it is. It is a direct shout out to the Bodhisattva. And again, getting a little technically Buddhist perhaps for this audience. One of the major bodhisattvas is, in Sanskrit, Avalokiteshvara, which is the same person as the Chinese and Japanese Kannon and Kuan Yin. And that name, Avalokiteshvara, translates to mean the one who hears the cries of the world and comes. So, as you said, I like to wear my Buddhism very lightly. I don't want to, my poems do not walk around the world in Buddhist robes, nor do I. I think these ideas are comprehensible, whether you recognize the reference or not, which is right. Exactly what I want my poems to speak, not as a practitioner of this or that, but as a human being.
Yes, you said. I remember
lives.
You said to me. You said to me in one of our early interviews. I don't want to be a Zen poet. I want to be a human poet.
Exactly. Exactly. Because human lives are not divided up by the flavor of the stream that we happen to have been born into. I can read Greek mythology. I can read trickster tales from Indonesia or Africa or Australia, and I recognize the shared humanity in them, the shared experiences in them.
Sure.
I don't, I spoke earlier of particularity and specificity, and yes, the local is, we also live in the local, but we are human beings, and human beings share. We are born, we love, we hunger, we lose, we die, we try to help others, we struggle. And in these causes and conditions and all of the flux of it, there is more similarity than there is difference. To say us and them is to blind yourself to every child born into this world has the same capacity of magnitude, of soul, of love, of possibility. And our job is to allow that to come forward if we possibly can help it, if we can help anyone in any way, so that, for those who don't have it smothered in their hearts, this is how you get good people. This is how you get, those who, your neighbor is sick, you bring them a bowl of soup. You don't even think about it, you just do. Um, uh, and then sometimes a person halfway across the world is hungry. And then maybe you make a donation to World Central Kitchen and you're so glad it exists so that you can.
Yes, yes. And what if someone down the street or on the other side of town is being um, detained by ICE? Or what if someone on the other side of the world is suffering genocide? How does all this help us with that?
So
With things of that magnitude? Because
Yeah.
there is an us
Yes.
and a them. And right now, for people in this audience, and for you and I, the them, the way we see it, is the people who are very intentionally bringing the suffering,
Right.
and the domination.
Yeah.
Um, and how does what we're talking about here help us in this moment? What we're facing here in this country, and what we are doing, what we are complicit in around the world.
So I'm going to answer very briefly, and then I'm going to return the question to you, because this is what your book is exploring, and this is, after all, about your book. So my own answer, and maybe this is as radical as saying all things are perfect just as they are, but my own answer is no, it's all us. It's all us, all the way down. It is, in recent poems, I sometimes use the term our species. Human beings are such fallible creatures. I do not feel, I am as complicit as anyone else in all of it. And I cannot say those bad people. I can't, because it's me, it's us, it's all of us. So for me, it is really a radical non-separation. And what that allows me to feel is, yes, I feel huge flashes of anger. I do. But the anger is information. And once I have felt the information, I do not want to sit there steeping in anger, because I do not think good action comes from anger. I think the information of anger is indispensable, but to try to find any effective action, I want to be sitting inside of compassion and not anger. And so know them, all us. But now I would like you to ask yourself to answer this question, because you have spent, many years and many pages and sentences and revisions and questions exploring this. So please.
You would have to do that, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would.
I was hoping that by having you here as my interlocutor, I could just interview you, and then I wouldn't have to talk anymore about the book,
Right. But most of our audience is not me. So,
so fair question. Although most of our audience may be here to see you, I don't know. But it is a fair question, and one that I will try not to. I'll try not to let you down. So, to me, what you were talking about there is what I call radical solidarity, and it touches on many of the themes that you've brought up. there's been a lot, and for many years, uh, written and discussed and debated over what is solidarity. I mean, it's such a central term for what we do on the left and the social movements that we are trying to build and have built, and the fights and struggles that we're in. So, uh, I can't possibly go into all of that. But a question that occurred to me as I was writing these essays, especially in the more recent years, the more recent essays, is can you ever really be in solidarity with an abstraction? You know, you may voice solidarity with a particular movement or a particular people or a particular ideology or something, but for most of us, most of the time, uh, those things are abstract to us. They're abstract, and in the moment that we say them, and in most of our lives, at least those of us who are privileged enough to not be right on the front lines, they're abstract. So, so the question is, can you ever really be in solidarity with anything other than another human being, another person, and then another person and another person? In other words, what I'm saying there is not just a kind of liberal Western humanist kind of individualism. Um, Individualism as an ideology, you know, is not the same thing as universal humanism necessarily, um, and the same thing as what I'm calling human solidarity, because uh, collectives are obviously made up of individuals, and so solidarity with a person um, can become universal, can be lived in a way that is universal, so that it's only us. But that doesn't necessarily help me in this very moment, where we have literally the vice president and president of the United States now, you know, talking about the assassination of Charlie Kirk in terms of a vast left-wing conspiracy, organized, orchestrated. There's to foment this kind of violence against the right. Um, it's 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 surreal just how completely Orwellian it is, and really just how downright evil it is. And I don't mind, this is my, I don't mind using these terms. Most of the people I know who practice Zen, and even quite a few Christians that I know, really don't like to go there in terms of pointing the finger and judging and um, naming names and calling evil what it is, calling genocide, by its name, when we see it play out in real time. Um, so so I struggle between this kind of push and pull between, my desire for, and I feel the necessity of some kind of universalism when it comes to what we mean, when it comes to solidarity, and then actually putting solidarity into action as a member of a social movement and in the political field. And I don't know how to reconcile those things. Maybe there's some dialectic where it all, it all works out, but and plunges forward. But that's what we need. Looking at the time and knowing that we want to get to some questions from the audience, if there are some, um, I want to jump to what is almost the end of the book, the last chapter of the book, the one about Frantz Fanon,
Yeah.
and which begins with uh, my reaction to Gaza and to the genocide in Gaza. And and then ends with an appeal to what I see and others see as Fanon's humanism and his reaching for a kind of universalism that I think is often lost in our conversations about Fanon. But at the end of that chapter, I bring it back around to global climate justice and global climate catastrophe, and I say this: if violence, armed struggle, is justified in the case of anti-colonial liberation and anti-fascist resistance, and in spite of my own nonviolent commitments, in solidarity with my overwhelmingly nonviolent comrades, it is hard to argue that it is not. In other words, just to edit myself there, it is hard to argue that armed struggle and violence is not justified in the cause of anti-colonial liberation and anti-fascist resistance. So if that's the case, for me anyway, then how could it not be justified in the struggle against global neocolonial fossil fuel-driven ecocide amounting to genocide in many of the world's poorest and most oppressed places, against the willful, because foreseeable and preventable, decimation, if not eradication, of entire populations and cultures, rendered superfluous, as Hannah Arendt would say, by totalitarian fossil capital. As in the history of anti-colonial liberation struggles, the climate justice struggle, the fight for a habitable planet and a livable human future in which justice is still possible, will not be radical enough or fearless enough until enough of us are desperate enough to risk everything. The question, maybe the only question left at this hour, is whether we will hold on to our humanity in our desperation. So you asked, I answered. To me, holding on to that humanity, our humanity, is what we've been talking about. And in the face of despair and desperation, and I don't really know true desperation, obviously. There are countless people around the world and in our own country who are truly desperate at this very moment as we speak. I don't know what that is like. But the fact that there are so many people in that situation makes me feel desperate. Okay. And so that desperation can lead us into some very dark places. It can lead us into nihilism, really, and a response that can just spiral out of control in terms of how we treat one another, in terms of the kind of society and the kind of politics that we will have, right? And yet it is necessary, I believe, to recognize that the situation is desperate, both right now, right here in our country, and globally. And that the only thing I can imagine that will help us hold on to our humanity and our desperation is what we're talking about here, what we're referring to here as a kind of universal human solidarity. So again, you can respond to that, and then maybe we can. Actually, I thought of something. Please do respond to that, and then maybe we could have you read one more short poem that we talked about earlier, because I actually think it would be a good place for us to end our part of this conversation.
So I'm going to widen the circle of what we are thinking about for a moment and just say that my solidarity is with more than the human.
Mm.
And the devastation and catastrophe of climate, I want to name the insects, the frogs, the fishes, the birds, the tiny organisms who might possess a wisdom and bliss we will never know they possess, and yet they exist, and who knows what their experience of it might be. I don't want to presume that the joy of an oyster is less than the joy of a dolphin, is less than the joy of a person or a bird, or so the question, the words that came into my mind as you were speaking, and I think you are raising an absolutely essential question, and you are one of the few who's willing to look at it, and this is part of your courage as a person and as a writer. And we had, in one of our email exchanges, I was just saying, look, I don't know who I will be if the barricades are at my door. I don't know whether, what I will feel is the right thing to do. I don't think any of us knows until we are in such a position who we are, which direction we will go. Nonviolence so far has been my embrace, but I can't say that I'm sorry that certain things have been stopped by what seems to have been a necessary employment of force. Again, going back to Buddhist teaching, there is the idea of skillful means. And what I have seen thus far and worry about for this country right now is unskillful means will bring into existence the worst possible reply. And we are right on the edge of martial law in this country. I don't want to see it, and I think any excuse is being waited for martial law. So, that is, the bodhisattva is not stupid or blind or programmed or programmatic. And so the question is, in any moment, what are the skillful means towards a transformation from narrow self-interest to broad selves interest, perhaps we will call it for this moment. But the fact that, in the end, I have to say, I do not know the answer. I will never, I have that great doubt, that questioning, the worst things in the world are done by people who are sure they are right. I hope I am never sure that I am right, because then any means justifies the end you are so sure of. But the poem that you are leading us towards as the close of our two-part conversation. Oh, I had so many things I wanted to ask you that we haven't gotten to, and so many things we could have covered, but it's always that way when we talk.
Yes.
So I was last summer, just about a year ago, I was very shortly on my way to go to China to have a bunch of conversations connected with, a reason that I was being asked to China. And I imagined conversations that didn't actually happen, but I was imagining them. And I was imagining the questions that would be asked about this country's stance, and this country, which is a democracy in which I am supposed to have been able to have some, input to what we do and who we are. And I was just imagining, what will I say? If I'm asked this, if I am asked that. And this poem is what came up for me. I am asked a question. My life asks me a question. I suggest a better question, one I like more the sound of, with more pleasing grammar. My life humors me. My life asks me that. I don't know an answer. My life is stubborn and clever. My life says, you must choose. I can't choose. I leave the question. I go into the garden and weed. My life weeds with me. The knees of my pants are stained.
Indeed. I think, as I told you, there's some real zen in that poem.
Thank you.
So,
No concrete
but
advice, but
what I also said is, and what resonates for me so much, is this sense of intellectual humility that is in that
yeah.
poem. And I do believe, and I know this is probably shocking for a writer on the left to say, but I think that a little intellectual humility goes a long way these days.
Yes.
So, so let's see. I am supposed to. Here we go. Open up the chat and look at some questions that Haymarket has posted in here for me. So,
Oh.
yeah, here we go. So we have about 15 minutes, and let's see. Someone asks, uh, given the inclusion of spirituality in the title in this discussion, I wonder if the two of you could comment on one of the things that's so often not commented upon within the context of the climate crisis, the profound loss of natural wonder that will accompany it. And why do you think it's so rare for this to be discussed in left-wing political circles? Wow, yeah. That's a excellent question. Jane, do you want to take a whack at that?
I'll take the first whack. You can take the
Okay.
second. This is a great pinata for us.
Yes.
So, in my circles, of course, wonder is much spoken of, and awe is much spoken of, and the radiance of existence, and what we are doing when we diminish that in any ecological niche, whether it's 3 square inches or 3 square miles, is a tremendous loss of the sense of the possible and our own range of being as human beings. And so, to carry the thread from what we were saying just before turning to the questions in this, I have begun to think that the experience of awe and the experience of humility, as I understand that word, and I know there are other associations to it, they are two ways of looking at the same thing.
Mm.
Because when you feel awe and wonder, your own life becomes like one of those tiny figures traveling the roadways of a Chinese landscape painting. And
Mm.
that feels to me a kind of right relationship to existence. It's not that we're not there, it's that we are surrounded by time, space, magnitude of existence, evolutions, cornucopia of strangeness that
Yes.
we live and walk in, and fragrances and flavors. And, for our brief lifetimes, we get to partake of this. We get to
Mm.
eat a blueberry. Um, and for a moment, you disappear into the blueberry. And that is both an experience of awe and an experience of humility. And so for me, when I look at the question of what I call the crisis of the biosphere, that is what I see.
Yeah.
I see this great luminosity, and I do not want parts of it put out, snuffed.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I would say that to this question of why it's so rare for this aspect to be discussed in left-wing political circles, I think there's a deep history to that. I think that there's always been a kind of fraught relationship between so-called environmentalism, or the eco folks, and the left. And I think there are reasons for that. I think, good reasons for that in some ways. I think that an appreciation of the natural world. Well, first of all, if you're able to appreciate the natural world in your daily life, then that right there is a sign of class privilege and race privilege in many ways. Um, but um, it's also, again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying much earlier about a tendency toward inwardness, or kind of retreat from the world. That we see. It comes from this binary, or this false binary, but this binary of like retreating into the natural world, and as it's a place of retreat and escape, not engagement necessarily, which is absurd, of course, in many ways, because some of the most engaged people I know are the people who have been fighting and taking enormous risks to save parts of the natural world. Um, but I'll also just say, for me, that the natural world and wonder in the natural world is a large part of what keeps me going. Uh, I actually have some woods right out behind my house, and which is an insanely fortunate thing about my life. And every morning I go and stand at the edge of the woods, around the time the sun comes up, or not too long after, and just listen and look and absorb uh, the woods. And for me, that's, I don't know, it's there's something there. I can't name it, I can't explain it, but uh, that that encourages me, and that gives me strength. Resolve gives me resolve. So Jane, here's another question directed to
Wait, can
you.
I throw in
Yes,
one thing on that, which
yeah,
is
please, please.
I couldn't help but think of the Turkish poet Hikmet, who was
Okay, great.
jailed for 10 years as a communist, so a person of the left, whatever one wants to put that context into. He was in jail for 10 years, and from his jail cell, he saw a tree. And that tree kept him going for 10 years. That tree
Mm,
showed love letters to his wife and the tree.
mm.
So the natural world is not only available to people of privilege. Um, that was all I wanted to add. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And uh, yes. So Jane, actually, this might even uh, segue a bit. What do you see as the relationship between your poetry and your activism?
So my poetry has become, to a great extent, my activism. In that, you spoke in introducing me of my having founded Poets for Science. That was founded as a one-day butterfly project that then refused to go away for the big March for Science on Earth Day in 2017, which was a political protest,
Mm,
um, in defense of reality and our being willing to see reality as real, a theme which has only grown ever more urgent and pressing in our current situation. And so, I became to all the way back in my poems, back when I was known as a erotic poet or a Zen poet or a horse poet or whatever those early poems were thought of. Every book had some poem looking at the question of war. Every single book had something about whatever that current conflict was. It has always been part of my work. It has shifted, increasingly in more recent years to be the subject of my work. So the crisis of the biosphere, the crisis of social compact, the crisis of compassion, the crisis of reality allegiance, more and more, I I speak of this. I have a poem coming out in the about to arrive publication. I guess we aren't naming any publications besides Haymarket and The Nation. So I'll just say, so I have a poem in something that's already arrived, and then I have a poem in something that's about to arrive. And the poem in the thing which is about to arrive.
You can name the magazine. It's okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
New York Review of Books.
Okay.
And it is a poem about resistance rising when it seems impossible. But it is a poem written in my mind. I was thinking, what will happen if we here have to write for the censor? What will Americans aren't used to writing for the censor, but many countries, they have done that for decades. And so the poem is ostensibly about cows. But if you read the poem with the alertness that any, person of Eastern Europe or current day China would read it, it is absolutely, yes, it is completely about cows. And it is also completely about the law firms and universities and politicians who have allowed themselves to be rolled over and agreed to that. And my hope that this will someday end. Perfectly clear to me that that's about. I have no idea if most people who read it will see only the cows or not. There is one word of activist tip-off in it, which is the adjective unsupine.
Okay, unsupine.
Unsupine.
Oh, yeah. Jane, I see that word on posters and protest signs all the time. Yes, absolutely.
So anyhow, I'm an activist poet, and then I try to bring and then when I speak in the world as a poet, I bring in these things which, I don't want to be not noticed.
How about, and yet she persisted.
And yet she persisted, one of the great phrases of all time. So yes, as a poet, I will attempt to persist whether I am writing for the censor or not writing for the censor. The next poem to come out after that is the opposite of writing for the censor. It will be absolutely, is
great.
Complete. It is a poem that if I had published it in Stalin's Russia would have sent me to the Gulag.
Good.
Yes.
I mean, not good, but not, you know what I mean.
By
the way, speaking of communists, but the good kind, someone noted that, for what it's worth, Rosa Luxemburg writes about being able to see the birds on her sill.
Yes,
while in the German prison.
Thank you. Yes.
So that's a great reference, and I thank whoever gave us that. So we don't have much more time. I'm not sure exactly how we close out here, but we might just take a moment to reflect on what it means right now in this moment to be doing what we're doing right now. And meaning, in other words, this event, this conversation hosted by Haymarket Books, in the kind of emergency moment in which we find ourselves. And so you were describing the censor and writing for the censor. And I think the events of the last few days have really begun to bring home for me where we are. And I mean, I think many of us have seen this coming and have feared it. But to be in that moment when the top advisor to the President of the United States says basically, as God is my witness, or whatever he said, so help me God, or whatever, we will bring the full force of the United States government on these basically the left, it may become dangerous to have conversations like this one, the way we're having them. And I hope that, and I believe that, we're going to keep having them. But, it used to be that it was truly dangerous to be a leftist and to be a radical. in this country, and of course, it still is so many places. And it may well be that it's becoming again. And so I thank you, Jane, for being here and participating in this. I know that, I know this isn't necessarily your, the space that you find yourself in. So.
It is part of the space that I very much want to find myself in and to find my words in. The realms of resolve and of solidarity and of skillful action and of resistance and of hope that a cow lying down will someday stand up again, implausible though that can look when you see the cow lying down. We must find our ways to be with one another and support one another. The way an uninterrupted ripple of a pebble thrown into a lake will travel forever, to the edge of the lake, beyond the lake, to the edge of the galaxy, to the edge of the universe. You just have to keep throwing the pebbles. So thank you so much for inviting me to the conversation.
Thank you. And I will let you know, and everyone else here know, that when it comes to finding my resolve, I find my resolve in solidarity. I find my resolve. You are the source of my resolve, Jane, and
you of mine,
and my friends at Haymarket, and my comrades in the climate movement, and really everyone who's engaged in this struggle are the sources of my resolve. So, on that note,
thank you.
I do see that it is 6:30 here, and whatever time it is, you're at 3:30 your time, and we're supposed to bring this conversation to a close.
Thank you. Until next time.
Until next time, indeed.